This is an introduction to teaching the consonants at the Kelter Center. We're going to begin with an overview of word study. Then we're going to go into a section about brain-compatible teaching and learning. Then we're going to speak about the concepts that underlie the consonants. And finally, we'll go through the sequence of teaching and materials. Then we're going to do a demonstration with the student to show you each of the different groups of consonants and how to teach them to a student. There will be different sections of this general video, and you can then look at the different sections to help you remember when you're about to teach these concepts to your student. So let's begin with an overview of word study. English is a morphophonemic language. What could that possibly mean? English is based in sounds, that's the phonemic part, and so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be teaching the consonants and the vowels. And the morpho part of morphophonemic means that our language is also built on meaning. So when we teach our students to read and spell individual words, we begin by teaching them the letters and the sounds that go along with those letters in a strong patterned way. We then teach a layer of orthography, which is how the letters are strung together to make common patterns. So what you know about the rules of phonics really applies to those orthographic patterns. And finally, we teach our students about prefixes, suffixes, and roots, first from the Anglo-Saxon origin or etymology, then from the Latin, French etymology, and finally Greek prefixes. Actually, Greek come with combining forms, so we don't have prefixes, but rather put together two root syllables. English is a highly regular language when you teach it this way. In fact, many people say, oh, English is just so difficult to understand, you can't possibly teach it or learn it, and let your students use spell check and don't bother to teach spelling. Well, that is just not true. If you teach the letters and their sounds, the orthographic patterns and morphology, prefixes, suffixes, and roots, then 86% of the English language is regular and thoughtful and patterned, and your students, no matter how young or old they are, can learn to read and spell accurately and fluently. English spelling is the opposite of reading. And if we look in many of the different curriculum goal bases for different states, we see that reading is emphasized a great deal more than spelling. But spelling, because it is the flip-flop of reading, is an essential teaching exercise. So we spend as much time on teaching spelling as we do on reading at the Kelter Center. And what you learn and practice in reading of individual words is reinforced by spelling those words. In the Kelter Center curriculum, we use several different programs to teach reading and spelling of individual words. The Lindemood Phonemic Sequencing program is used to teach the letters and the sounds and how to pair those up, as well as the concepts. And it also is used to teach phonemic awareness. The Seeing Stars program works with the LIPS program after you have directly taught these concepts to reinforce and create symbol imagery. Sometimes if you look at a word and you say, oh, that word looks or doesn't look right, it's because in your mind you have an image of the patterns of spelling and reading. The Seeing Stars program develops that in our students. We also use fluency exercises at every stage of teaching the letters and the sounds and spelling patterns and reading patterns, so that we reinforce that linkage between the letter and the sound, between words and how they should be read or spelled, between phrases and connected text. We also use my spelling program to teach the spelling patterns thoughtfully, and there will be other videos in this series that you'll be able to use to see how to teach the different spelling patterns. And finally, we use many different programs to teach the prefixes, suffixes, and roots. All of these are clearly outlined in the curriculum guide that is going to be part of your instruction during your training. Now let's turn to brain-compatible teaching and learning. One of the things that we want our students to understand is how they use their brain to learn. It empowers them. It says, I can learn things that are challenging with enough practice and with explicit teaching. So, how do we use our brains when we learn to read and spell? Well, the brain really likes to learn in patterns. Our memory works best with 7 plus or minus 1 or 2 chunks of information, but we have quite a number of consonants. We have over 20 consonants. So how can we learn all those consonants and remember them? Well, we chunk them together in patterns, and the consonants come either in pairs or in groups of 3 and 4. So we are going to teach that concept of how to cluster the ideas, how the consonants are similar, how they're different, and how they create patterns. When we teach, we want to balance between instructing directly and asking questions. There are some things that you can ask questions about when you're teaching the consonants. You can ask your students how their mouth feels, if they're using their lips or their tongue, the front of the tongue or the back of the tongue. But we cannot ask them what are the concepts that underlie the organization, linguistics of how the consonants are formed and paired and all of that. We have to teach those concepts. We can probably ask the students the names of the letters, and they'll know those, but they won't know the labels like lip popper and tongue tapper. We have to provide those. So there are some things that you can ask and some things that you need to teach. And as you go through watching the videos, I want you to really pay attention to what are the things that I teach to the students and when can I ask questions. You also want to look at the types of ways that questions are framed. Many times when you begin the direct instruction of the consonants, you do not pose open-ended questions. You ask a question and then give your student choices. For instance, when you form this letter, are you using your lips or your tongue? Are you using the front of your tongue or the back of the tongue? Is the air coming in a stream or is it coming out in a puff? So if you frame your questions with the alternate possible answers, your students' thinking will be directed by your questions, and they will be successful, and that's what we want. We scaffold this also. In the beginning, we frame all of our questions with alternate answers, but as our students become more and more used or familiar to the questions that we're asking, we can become more and more open-ended so that once you've taught the consonants and you're practicing them, then instead of saying, what part of your mouth are you using, lips or tongue, you can just say, what part of your mouth are you using? Eventually, you want to be able to see if your students can switch roles with you. Can they be the question posers and ask you the questions? When we teach the consonants, we create very active learning. The more active your student is involved, the more likely they will remember the information that you are teaching them. We present the ideas with pictures. We talk about the letters. We talk about the sounds. So we're using the auditory system as well as the visual. We create labels or words which describe how we use our mouth to form the different consonants. The reason that we add these elements of how we articulate the sounds, how we form them in our mouth, as well as the sounds, as well as what the letters look like, as well as having pictures of the mouth, is that many times our students do not have good phonological processing. They don't have a good feedback system. They're not hearing the sounds and then pairing the sounds with the letters and how they form them in their mouth. So we teach that set of skills explicitly, and that teaching and practice and just going over and over it again until our students are masterful literally trains the auditory processing that is necessary for our students to learn the sounds and the letters. Our brain also likes novelty. So one of the things that we really want to do when we're teaching the consonants is we don't want to teach them until our students are nauseated by the process. We want to keep novelty in our teaching. We want to teach the consonant dialogue, which is what I'm going to model for you with a student, and then we want to practice it by doing receptive and expressive practice, by assembling the consonants and vowels with the pictures and letters, and we want to play games. But you don't do that until your students are bored with it. Really, where you cement the pairing of the sounds and the symbols is when your students are reading words, spelling words, doing rapid automatic naming, RAN exercises, and in the fluency. So the dialogue that you're going to be looking at in the rest of this video is a one-time teaching experience. You teach it to your students, and then you find a variety of ways of reinforcing it, of using it, and making it interesting to them. What are the concepts that we need to teach to our students? Most of the students that you are going to be working with at the Kelter Center are familiar with the consonants, probably more knowledgeable of the consonants than they are of the vowel sounds. So what we're doing is we're teaching these concepts a different way. We're including the linguistic underlying concepts, not just the letter and the sound. So even if your student is familiar with these ideas, we want to reinforce the linguistic concepts, move quickly through that to reading and spelling and fluency exercises. We also want to set the climate with our students. We want to teach them how they use their brains to learn most efficiently, and we want to teach them about the chunking of the ideas, the linguistic ideas that are inherent in the consonants. And we want them to know how to use their brains most efficiently to remember the concepts, and how practice is literally creating new neural pathways in their brain. The consonants are one of two types of letters in the English language. We have consonants and vowels. The consonants are called closed phonemes because we use some part of our mouth, our lips, our tongue, our teeth, the palate or roof of the mouth, the voice box, to close off the sound, to close off the air, and then release it. So when we're teaching the consonants, the types of questions that we need to ask are, what part of our mouth are we using to close off the air? What is the action of that part of the mouth? And how does it close off and then release the air? What is the quality of the air? Is it coming out in a stream? Is it a puff? Is it a lot of air? Is it a little bit of air? Is it cool air? Is it hot air? We also want to talk about whether we're using our voice box. Is it vibrating and voiced, or is it not vibrating and unvoiced? In the LIPS program, we use the terms quiet and noisy to describe whether the voice box is vibrating, thus noisy, or quiet. When we learn the consonants, we are going to connect the sound, the feeling, the letter as it is visual, the letter name, and a linguistic label. Now, what is the sequence of how we teach the consonants? When we begin with setting the climate, teaching our students about what we are teaching, how we are going to teach it, and why we are teaching it. Then we go into the concepts about the consonants, which we just spoke about. We teach the pairs of consonants in a specific order based on how much each of our students can absorb and integrate in any given lesson. So, if you're working with a very young student, you might start with the first 3 pairs of consonants, P, B, T, D, and KG, and only work with those 3 pairs. With maybe an older, maybe ending first grade student or second grade student, in the same lesson, you might teach those 3 groups of consonants and add the P, the F, V, the TH, the 2 sounds of TH, which are called continuals. With an older student, you might teach all of the pairs in one lesson. So the last group of pairs are the sibilants, the SZ, SH, ZH, CHJ. You need to gauge your students' capacity to integrate the information and not overwhelm them. So you might teach 3, you might teach 5, you might teach 8 in a single lesson. You are the decider of that, along with watching your student. We also need to teach the groups of consonants, and there are 4 groups of consonants that we teach. We teach the nasals, M, N, and NG. That could be just one lesson. We teach the laterals or lifters, L and R. We teach the air or winds sounds, the H, WH, and W. And finally, we teach a group of consonants that do not have their own sounds, but rather borrow sounds from other letters. And so those are the letters C, X, Q, U, and Y. Each of these 4 groups could be a separate lesson, and actually I think that it is best to teach them as a separate lesson. What materials do you need to use? To teach the consonants, you need to have the pictures of the mouth from the LIPS program, and this is a sample of those mouth cards. And those are usually provided for you in your teaching station. You also need to have the letters of each of the consonant groups. And then finally, you will find in my spelling book a dialogue to help you know the very specific questions that you need to use to teach the consonants. Also, you'll see a similar dialogue in the LIPS manual. So you could easily have those to work from with your student until you've internalized those and memorized those. A last word, remember not to tarry when you're teaching these. You're going to use the dialogues that I'm going to demonstrate one and only one time, and then you're going to practice the letters with expressive, receptive practice, assembling, but really where your students stabilize these concepts is when you have them reading, spelling, and doing fluency exercises.